In 1962, St. Dominic's Hospital in rural Pennsylvania was sealed shut with concrete and steel. Not closed. Sealed. Every door welded. Every window bricked over. The entire building entombed like a crypt. The official reason? Structural damage. But the construction workers who sealed it told a different story. The local bars, voices shaking, hands trembling around their drinks. They said they could hear something moving inside as they worked. Something scratching at the doors from within. Something that shouldn't have been there. 43 years later, in 2005, a demolition crew broke through those seals. What they found inside wasn't decay or emptiness. It was something that had been waiting. Something that had been feeding. Something that had been growing in the darkness for over 4 decades. This is the story of what lives when everything else dies. This is the story of St. Dominic's Hospital, and I promise you, by the end, you'll understand why some buildings should never be opened. Stay with me, because this goes deeper than you can possibly imagine. The last shift, November 15, 1962. Nurse Catherine Walsh checked her watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. 13 more minutes and her shift would be over. 13 more minutes in St. Dominic's Hospital, and she could go home to her husband and her warm bed and try to forget the strange things that had been happening here over the past 3 weeks. St. Dominic's was a small rural hospital, built in 1889 to serve the coal mining communities scattered throughout the Pennsylvania hills. It had never been a cheerful place. Hospitals rarely were, but it had always been normal, predictable. The usual rotation of births and deaths, broken bones and pneumonia, the steady rhythm of human suffering and healing that defined medical work. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. It started with Patient Zero. That's what the staff had begun calling him, though his real name was Thomas Garrett. He had been brought in from one of the deep mines, unconscious, his body covered in a strange black substance that none of them could identify. It wasn't coal dust. It was organic, alive. Under the microscope it moved. Dr. Richard Brennan, the hospital's chief physician, had isolated Garrett immediately. Quarantine protocols, full protective gear. But it was already too late. Within 48 hours, 3 nurses and an orderly were showing symptoms. A fever that spiked to impossible temperatures. Skin that began to darken and harden. Eyes that lost their color, turning completely black. And the hunger. God, the hunger. Catherine shuddered, pushing the thoughts away. She walked down the 3rd floor corridor, her shoes clicking on the linoleum, the sound echoing in the unusual silence. St. Dominic's had been evacuated 2 days ago. All the patients transferred to facilities in Pittsburgh and Harrisburg. All the staff sent home except for a skeleton crew. Just her, Dr. Brennan, 2 orderlies, and a security guard. They were supposed to be packing up the remaining medical supplies, preparing for the hospital's closure. Except Catherine knew it wasn't really about closure. It was about containment. She reached the quarantine wing and paused outside the heavy steel door. Through the small window, she could see the 5 beds where the infected patients lay. Thomas Garrett and the 4 staff members who had been exposed. They weren't moving. They never moved anymore during the day. Only at night. Only when the lights went out. You shouldn't be here alone. Catherine spun around. Dr. Brennan stood behind her, his face haggard. 10 years older than it had been 3 weeks ago. He was a good man, a dedicated physician, but this situation had broken something in him. She could see it in his eyes. "I was just checking," she said, "making sure they're still what? Still contained. Still alive." Dr. Brennan laughed, a bitter sound. "I don't think alive is the right word anymore, Catherine." He moved past her to the window and looked inside. "The CDC came yesterday. Did I tell you that? 3 men in hazmat suits. They examined the patients, took samples, ran tests. Do you know what they found?" Catherine shook her head. "Nothing. No bacteria, no virus, no parasite, nothing that should be causing this. But the infection is spreading. Not through the air, not through contact, through something else, something they can't measure." "What do you mean?" Dr. Brennan turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw genuine terror. "They're changing, Catherine, transforming into something else. And whatever that black substance is, it's not killing them. It's improving them, making them stronger, more durable. Last night, I watched Thomas Garrett bend the steel bed frame with his bare hands. This morning I found scratch marks on the inside of the door, deep grooves in solid steel." "Then why are we still here?" Catherine whispered. Why haven't they evacuated us? They are. Tomorrow morning, a military transport is coming to take the patients to a secure facility. And then, he trailed off. And then what? And then they're sealing the building. Permanently. Concrete. Steel. They're going to entomb St. Dominic's like it never existed. Catherine felt her blood run cold. But if those things are as strong as you say, it won't hold them forever, Dr. Brennan said quietly. They know that, but it might hold them long enough to figure out how to kill them, or at least long enough to forget about them. A sound echoed through the corridor, a low scraping noise, like nails on metal. Both of them froze. It's too early, Dr. Brennan breathed. They don't move until after midnight. They never move until. The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the corridor. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. Emergency power should have kicked in immediately. The backup generators should have engaged. But there was nothing, just absolute, suffocating blackness. Catherine, Dr. Brennan's voice came from somewhere to her left. Don't move, don't make a sound. She could hear her own breathing, rapid and shallow, and underneath it, another sound. The scraping was louder now, closer. And with it came something else, a wet, rhythmic noise, like breathing but wrong, too slow, too deliberate. A voice spoke in the darkness, Thomas Garrett's voice, but changed, deeper, layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. Dr. Brennan, we've been waiting for you? Catherine heard Dr. Brennan's sharp intake of breath. Thomas? How did you? The door's locked. It's solid steel. Steel bends, the voice replied. Everything bends. Everything breaks. Everything changes. You taught us that. You showed us what we could become. I didn't show you anything. That infection, whatever it is, it's not. Infection? The voice laughed, and the sound made Catherine's skin crawl. Is that what you think this is? We're not infected, Doctor. We're awakened. The darkness below the earth, the deep places where no light has ever reached, they're full of such wonderful things, ancient things, patient things. Things that have been waiting for someone to dig deep enough to open the door. Catherine's eyes were adjusting slightly. She could make out shapes now, darker shadows against the darkness, and one of them, the S, moving toward them. We're not leaving tomorrow, Thomas Garrett's voice continued. None of us are leaving. This hospital is ours now, our chrysalis, our breeding ground, and you're going to help us, whether you want to or not. Dr. Brennan's voice shook when he spoke. The military is coming. They'll contain you. They'll try, and they'll fail. Because we're not what you think we are. We're not monsters to be destroyed. We're the next step. Evolution doesn't stop, Doctor. It just finds new directions. Catherine's hand found the wall. She began sliding along it, moving away from the voice. Her fingers touched a doorknob. The stairwell. If she could just... The woman is trying to leave, another voice said. Female, Nurse Delacroix, one of the infected. Should we stop her? No, Thomas Garrett said. Let her go. Let her tell them. Let her spread the word. Fear is useful. Fear makes people do irrational things. Fear makes them run, and we can always catch those who run. Catherine didn't wait to hear more. She wrenched open the door and plunged into the stairwell, her feet pounding down the stairs in blind panic. Behind her, she could hear them. Not following, just laughing. The sound echoed through the empty hospital like a promise. She burst through the ground floor exit and into the parking lot. The November air hit her like a slap, cold and clean. Her car was across the lot, 50 yards. She could make it. She had to make it. She was 20 yards out. Why, when she heard the explosion? The ground floor windows of St. Dominic's shattered outward in a shower of glass. Flames erupted from inside, orange and furious. The emergency generators must have ignited. Or maybe something else, something deliberate. Catherine stood frozen, watching the hospital burn, and in the windows of the upper floors, she could see them, 5 dark figures, standing perfectly still, silhouetted against the flames, watching her, not burning, not fleeing, just watching. She got in her car and drove. She drove until she reached the police station in the next town. She told them everything, about the patients, about the infection, about what Dr. Brennan had said. They listened patiently. Then they made some phone calls. Within an hour, men in dark suits arrived. They asked her the same questions, took notes, thanked her for her cooperation, and then they gave her a choice. You can talk about what you saw, one of them said. You can tell people about the patients at St. Dominic's. And we'll make sure everyone knows you're insane. You'll spend the rest of your life in institutions, medicated and ignored. Or you can sign this non-disclosure agreement. You can accept a generous settlement. And you can never speak of this again. Catherine signed. What else could she do? She watched from a distance the next day as military trucks arrived at St. Dominic's. She watched as construction crews began their work, welding steel plates over the doors, bricking up the windows, pouring concrete, entombing the building and everything inside it. The official story was structural fire damage. The unofficial story, whispered in bars and diners, was that something had gone wrong, some kind of chemical spill, some kind of contamination. The building had to be sealed for public safety. But Catherine knew the truth. She had seen their faces in the windows. She had heard Thomas Garrett's voice in the darkness. They weren't dead. They weren't destroyed. They were sealed inside, yes, but not gone. Waiting. The breaking 43 years later, March 17, 2005. Jake Morrison was 24 years old and desperately needed this job. The demolition company had hired him fresh out of technical school, and this was his first major project. The old St. Dominic's Hospital, sealed since 1962, was finally being torn down to make room for a shopping center. All right, listen up. Frank Delgado, the site foreman, gathered the crew around the sealed entrance. This building's been closed for over 40 years. There's going to be asbestos, lead paint, probably black mold. We're going in with full protective gear. Nobody takes off their respirator. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We cleared each floor, tagged the hazards, and get out. Simple and safe. Got it? The crew nodded. 12 men, armed with crowbars, flashlights, and decades of combined experience. They'd demolished dozens of old buildings. This was just another job. Jake helped set up the cutting torch. The entrance had been sealed with steel plates welded directly into the brick. It took 20 minutes to cut through. When the plate finally fell away with a crash, a smell rolled out that made everyone step back. Jesus, someone muttered. What is that? It wasn't decay. Decay had a sweetness to it, an organic rot that was unpleasant but familiar. This was different, sterile, chemical, like ozone and copper and something else, something that made Jake's hindbrain scream danger. Frank consulted his clipboard, trying to maintain an air of authority. Probably sealed in fumes from the fire. It'll clear out. Morrison, Chen, you're with me. First sweep of the ground floor. Everyone else, start setting up the support equipment. Jake followed Frank and Chen through the entrance. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a lobby frozen in time. The reception desk still had papers on it. Wheelchairs sat abandoned against the walls. A clock on the wall had stopped at 11:22 p.m. November 15, 1962. Creepy as hell, Chen muttered. Like everyone just vanished. They moved deeper into the hospital. The corridors were eerily preserved. No decay. No deterioration. Everything was exactly as it had been the day they sealed the building. Except for one thing. The scratches. They were everywhere. Deep gouges in the walls, claw marks on the doors. Even the ceiling showed signs of something scraping across it. Jake ran his gloved hand over one of the gouges. It was deep. An inch into solid concrete. What could do this? He asked. Frank didn't answer. He was staring at something further down the hallway. A door that had been torn completely off its hinges. Beyond it, stairs leading down basement. Chen said, You think we should check it? Not yet, Frank replied. We stick to the plan. Ground floor first, then we. A sound echoed through the hospital. A low, reverberating thud, like something heavy striking metal. All three men froze. Just the building settling, Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. Old structures do that. Another thud. Closer, and with it, a scraping noise. Something moving in the darkness ahead. Chen unslung his radio. Base, this is sweep team. We're hearing noises in the building, structural movement, requesting. The radio erupted in static. Through the white noise, Jake could swear he heard something. A voice, words he couldn't quite make out. Then the lights came on. Not all of them, just a few emergency bulbs scattered throughout the corridor. Flickering. Dying, but enough to see by, enough to reveal what stood at the far end of the hallway. It had been human once. You could tell from the basic shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But everything else was wrong. The skin had hardened into something like black chitin, segmented and gleaming. The hands had elongated into claws that scraped the floor as it moved. And the face, God, the face was the worst part. Still recognizable as human, but stretched, changed, eyes completely black, reflecting their flashlight beams like an animal's. Run, Frank whispered. Run now. They ran. Behind them, the thing that had once been human began to move faster, not running, stalking, taking its time. It had waited 43 years. It could wait a few more minutes. Jake burst through the entrance and into the sunlight. The rest of the crew stared at him, then at Frank and Chen, who came stumbling out behind him. What happened? Someone asked. Radio for help, Frank gasped. Police, military, I don't care. There's something in there. Something alive. That's impossible, the crew chief said. The building's been sealed for. A scream cut him off. One of the crew members had gone to peer through the entrance they'd cut open. He was backing away now, pointing. More of them were coming, emerging from the darkness like nightmares made flesh. 5, 10, 20. How many people had been sealed inside in 1962? How many had survived? How many had changed? The crew scattered, running for their vehicles. Jake made it to his truck and fumbled for his keys. Through the rearview mirror, he saw them emerging fully into the daylight. They moved slowly, cautiously, as if testing the world outside their prison. One of them tilted its head back and breathed in deeply, savoring the fresh air after 4 decades of recycled darkness. Then it looked directly at Jake's truck and smiled, a too wide smile full of too many teeth. The thing that had been Thomas Garrett, though, Jake had no way of knowing, that raised one clawed hand and pointed at the fleeing vehicles. The others responded immediately, spreading out, beginning to pursue. Jake floored it. Behind him, he could see them in his mirror, not running at full speed, not yet, still testing their limits, still remembering how to move in open space, but learning fast, adapting. He made it to the main road and didn't stop until he reached the police station 15 miles away. The officer at the desk listened to his story with increasing skepticism until Frank Delgado arrived with the rest of the crew, all of them telling the same impossible tale. Within hours, the area was swarming with police. By evening, state police. By midnight, military vehicles were rolling in. The official story was a gas leak. The area was cordoned off. News helicopters were turned away. But Jake saw the truth on the faces of the soldiers. They weren't responding to a gas leak. They were responding to a breach, a containment failure, something they'd been planning for, training for since 1962. The battle lasted 3 days. Jake watched from his hotel room, 2 miles from the cordon, as the sky lit up with explosions, tracer fire, flames. The thing about the infected, and that's what the soldiers called them, the infected, was that they were incredibly hard to kill. Bullets slowed them. Fire hurt them. But it took sustained, overwhelming force to actually stop them. And the why were smart. Tactical. They'd had 43 years in that sealed hospital to think, to plan, to evolve. They used the terrain, set ambushes, coordinated attacks. Every soldier they killed, every civilian they touched, became another vector, another carrier, another transformation. On the 4th day, they used the napalm. Jake watched from his window as St. Dominic's Hospital, and a 3-block radius around it, was turned into an inferno. The heat was so intense he could feel it from 2 miles away. When it was over, when the fires finally died, there was nothing left but ash and melted stone. The official death toll was listed as 37. Structural collapse during demolition. Tragic accident. The families were compensated. The media moved on, but Jake knew better. He'd seen the reports on the news. Unexplained attacks in neighboring towns. People getting sick, skin darkening, eyes changing. The infection hadn't been contained. It had spread, maybe not widely, maybe just a few vectors, but enough. 6 months later, Jake received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from a small town in Ohio. 3 people hospitalized with unknown illness. Symptoms included high fever and skin discoloration. The attending physician was quoted as being baffled by the presentation. Underneath the clipping, someone had written in precise, old-fashioned handwriting, "Evolution doesn't stop. It just finds new directions. We tried to warn them. We tried to make them understand. But they chose to seal us away instead of listening. Now we're free. And we're patient. We're so very patient. See you soon. T.G. Thomas Garrett. Still alive, still changing, still spreading. Jake burned the letter. He left Pennsylvania that same day. Changed his name. Moved to Alaska. Put as much distance as possible between himself and St. Dominic's Hospital. But he knows deep down that distance doesn't matter. Because that's the thing about evolution. That's the thing about infections that don't just kill but transform. They spread. They adapt. They wait. And somewhere out there, in hospitals and homes and offices, the descendants of Thomas Garrett are growing, changing, preparing for the day when there are enough of them that sealing buildings won't work anymore, that burning cities won't be enough. The CDC tracks them, of course, monitors the outbreaks, implements containment protocols. But for every infected individual they find and isolate, 3 more slip through the cracks. It's a war they're slowly losing, a war most people don't even know is being fought. Catherine Walsh died in 2003, 2 years before the demolition. She spent her final days in a nursing home, and according to the staff, she would sometimes wake screaming about things in the darkness, about patients who wouldn't die, about transformations that shouldn't be possible. Her final words, recorded by a nurse who thought she was just delirious, were these: "They're not monsters. That's what everyone gets wrong. They're us. They're what we become when we touch something we weren't meant to find. And we keep digging, we keep going deeper, we never learn." Dr. Richard Brennan died in the fire at St. Dominic's on November 16, 1960. At least that's what the official records say. But there are reports, unconfirmed and officially denied, of a physician matching his description seen in various hospitals over the decades. Always moving, always changing locations, always asking strange questions about deep tissue infections and cellular transformation. If those reports are true, if Dr. Brennan somehow survived and was infected, then he's been out there for over 60 years, studying the condition, understanding it, perhaps even perfecting it. This story is a reminder that humanity's greatest weakness is our curiosity, our need to dig deeper, to explore further, to open every sealed door and illuminate every dark corner. We assume that knowledge is always better than ignorance, that understanding is always preferable to mystery. But sometimes the things we find in the deep places of the earth, in the forgotten corners of reality, are sealed away for a reason. Sometimes the doors are locked not to keep things in, but to keep us out. St. Dominic's Hospital was sealed in 1962 because opening it would have been catastrophic. They knew the infection couldn't be cured, only contained. But containment only works if everyone respects the seals, if everyone resists the urge to peek inside. In 2005, we broke those seals. And now we're all living with the consequences. The next time you see an abandoned building, a boarded-up hospital, a condemned structure with warnings to stay away, remember this story. Remember that some seals exist for your protection. Some warnings are worth heeding. And some things that are still alive inside should never, ever be set free.